The lights inside the Phoenix Civic Center blazed so brightly they washed the stage in a sharp white glow. Cameras from every major network crowded the aisles, their lenses flickering like restless eyes waiting for the night's first spark. This wasn't just another town hall, this was an event already humming with tension, an event that would be replayed nationwide before midnight. Every seat was taken. From the ground floor all the way up to the highest balcony, thousands of people leaned forward, buzzing with anticipation. Some wore bright red caps and shirts stamped with heavy slogans. Others held small folded programs, treating them almost like keepsakes. It wasn't simply a political gathering, it was an arena. At center stage sat Donald Trump. Posture tall, chin lifted, fingers interlocked the way he always did when he was ready for verbal combat. To his right sat Vice President Kamala Harris, composed still, almost impossibly calm. She leaned back in her chair as if she had been here 1,000 times before, her eyes moving over the crowd with a quiet familiarity. The moderator barely finished greeting the room when the noise swelled into a wave of cheers, boos, whistles, and applause. Every corner of the hall was electric. What struck many wasn't the sound, it was the contrast. Trump, leaning forward like a boxer before the bell. Harris, shoulders loose, breathing steady, giving the sense that she had more time than everyone else in the room combined. When the hall finally settled enough for dialogue, the moderator, a local Phoenix journalist, turned toward Trump. "Mr. President," he said, voice steady but tight, "the country is watching tonight, and many Americans have one question on their minds, a question about values, about moral leadership. What would you like to say to the person sitting across from you?" Trump tightened his grip on the microphone. "I'll tell you this," he began sharply, his voice slicing through the arena. He jabbed a finger toward Harris. "People talk about her leadership, her so-called values. But you can't lead a country if your morals are questionable. And believe me, her morals, they've always been in question." Gasps rippled across the room. Some of Trump's supporters stood immediately, fists pumping in the air. Harris's supporters stared back, stunned, brows arched, lips parted in disbelief. Trump wasn't finished. "She talks about unity," he continued, "talks about compassion, talks about all these things, but look at her record, look at the choices she's made, the people she surrounds herself with, it doesn't add up." Every word came out like an accusation delivered before a silent jury. Harris didn't flinch, not once. She simply pressed a hand lightly against her knee and breathed slowly, keeping her eyes not on Trump, but on the audience. The moderator turned to her, Vice President Harris. Before she could reach for her mic, a woman in the front row shot to her feet. "Show him who you are!" she shouted. The hall erupted. Applause cascaded from one side. On the other, Trump supporters jeered loudly, chanting his name. The tension inside the hall thickened like storm clouds pressing down. Harris slowly leaned forward and wrapped her fingers around the microphone. She didn't speak at first. She let the noise rise and then fall, then dissolve into a hush. Silence could be a weapon, and she wielded it with surgical precision. In living rooms across Nevada, Texas, Kansas, families leaned closer to their screens, waiting. Finally, she spoke. "Look," Harris began, her voice steady and low. "We're all here tonight because we care about this country, and when people care, they don't always agree. Sometimes they argue, sometimes they clash. But real leadership isn't measured by who shouts the loudest." The hall went still. "It's measured," she continued, "by whether you can live with yourself when the shouting stops." The line dropped with the weight of a stone thrown into deep water. Trump's smile faltered. Before the moderator could step in, Trump cut forward, gripping his mic as if it was slipping. "That's nice," he snapped, waving a dismissive hand. "Sounds rehearsed, but people question your morals, Kamala. They question your values. They question your faith, and I've seen what they're talking about." Gasps again, shouts, an eruption. Trump leaned harder into his microphone. "Real American values? Bible values? I don't see those in her. Not at all." A man in the upper balcony yelled, "That's right!" As the crowd split again, roaring on both sides. The moderator tried to intervene. "Mr. President, the question—" Trump overrode him instantly. "Do I think America's been played? Yes, for years. And now she wants to come here and act like she's some symbol of moral strength? Give me a break!" Shouts broke out again. Applause hammered from one section. Boos drowned it from another. Harris didn't move. The stillness around her felt intentional, like a boundary no amount of noise could cross. More voices rose from the crowd, including a woman shouting, "She's more Christian than you!" Trump's lips curled, half irritation, half satisfaction. "That's the problem," he barked. "People are fooled by her calm speeches, fooled by her act, but I'm not fooled, and neither should America be." The noise churned uncontrollably. The moderator tried again. Vice President Harris, but Trump slammed through. Let me ask you something, Kamala. What morals guided you when you ignored working Americans? What morals guided you when you pushed policies that hurt churches? What morals guided you when your decisions tore communities apart? His words came fast and heavy, like punch after punch. Harris sat still as a stone. The contrast was stark. Trump's fists clenched around the mic. Harris's hands rested gently in her lap. The air felt like a wire stretched too tight. Finally, the moderator turned to her with a quiet urgency. Vice President Harris, the country would like to hear your response. Harris lifted her mic slowly. Her expression changed, just slightly, enough to signal she was done letting the accusations hang unanswered. And the hall fell silent. The hall quieted the moment Kamala Harris leaned in, not because anyone told it to, but because the room understood instinctively that she was about to speak with intention. Even the scattered hecklers softened to a low murmur, as if unsure whether to interrupt. Harris rested her elbows lightly on her knees, mic balanced between her palms. She looked toward the crowd before looking at Trump, but not in challenge, in acknowledgement. First, she began, her tone calm but resonant, I want to thank the people of Phoenix for showing up tonight. Democracy doesn't work without you. Warm applause broke out, not thunderous, but sincere, steady, lifting the tone just enough to reset the room. In homes across Arizona, Nevada, and Colorado, families nodded along. A father in Reno murmured, "Good start," while a college student in Tucson leaned closer to her screen. When the applause eased, Harris continued, The president brought up a serious question tonight, the question of morals, and I think it deserves an honest answer. Trump's smirk twitched. He shifted in his chair, tapping an impatient rhythm on the armrest. Harris ignored it. I've never claimed to be perfect, she said. None of us are. But leadership doesn't begin with perfection. It begins with intention, with the values you carry when no cameras are pointed at you. The moderator leaned forward, watching her closely. The room felt like it was leaning with him. For me, Harris continued, those values came from my mother, who taught me about compassion, from my grandparents, who worked every day without asking for praise, and yes, from Scripture. A ripple moved across the crowd. Trump straightened. His fingers tightened on the microphone. The tension sharpened. Harris kept going. Whether you're Christian, another faith, or no faith at all, there are truths that reach the human heart. Truths about humility, truths about integrity, truths about how we treat one another. Trump cut in loudly. Oh, here we go. She's preaching now. His supporters laughed. Scattered, uneasy laughs, but enough to break the quiet. Harris didn't react. She didn't even blink. When someone questions your morals, she said, the easy thing is to throw anger back. The harder thing is to let your actions speak, to let the people you've served tell the story. Applause grew again, louder, rising in a wave. A man shouted, That's right, as cameras zoomed in on a young woman wiping her eyes. Harris raised a gentle hand to calm the room. I don't carry the Bible as a prop, she said. I try to live by it. Trump leaned toward the mic instantly. Don't pretend, Kamala. Don't act like you're the moral guide of America. Churches struggled under you, families struggled under you. You hurt the faith community, everyone knows it. The interruption sparked shouting on both sides. The moderator stepped in. Mr. President, let her finish. Trump waved him off. No, I want America to hear this. She uses religion when it makes her look good. Gasps rippled. Harris remained still. Faith, she finally replied, isn't a weapon, and it isn't something we use to attack someone else's character. It's something personal, between a person and God. The room murmured, moved by the quiet weight in her tone. Trump tried again. Yeah, but Mr. President, the moderator warned sharply. Trump clamped his jaw shut but kept his glare locked on Harris. She looked out at the crowd, then into one of the cameras directly, the way someone does when they want millions watching at home to hear them personally. I want to share something with you all, she said, her voice softened. Something I carried long before politics, long before any office. The crowd leaned closer. In my 20s, before I ever imagined running for office, I worked with communities that felt forgotten, people who had lost jobs, parents raising kids alone, people who felt their country stopped seeing them. Cameras captured faces in the room, an older man nodding slowly, a young mother clutching a folded program tight to her chest. And I saw, Harris said, that what carried them through wasn't politics. It was scripture, it was prayer, it was belief, the belief that character mattered, even when nobody else believed in them. She let silence sit for a moment, thick, contemplative, intentional. That's why, she said, When someone questions my morals, I don't feel the need to yell back. I know the life I've lived, the people I've stood beside, the words that guided me when I was lost. The moderator leaned closer, sensing the shift. Harris inhaled slowly, then lifted her gaze toward the audience. "There's a verse I go back to often," she said. "A verse that reminds me what real strength is, and I think it's worth sharing tonight." A hush fell across the hall, so complete it felt like the air itself was waiting. Trump narrowed his eyes. The moderator leaned back. People in the crowd sat straighter. Phones in living rooms softened in trembling hands. Harris raised her microphone, paused, and held the silence like a conductor waiting for the exact beat before the orchestra begins. The moment sharpened, and sharpened more. Then she began to speak, but before she could deliver the verse, "This is the moment where your first engagement trigger fits naturally. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. I'm always amazed how far these stories travel. The timing blended with the pause, enhancing the dramatic tension without breaking immersion." Harris lowered her eyes, then lifted them again, ready to deliver the line that would shake the room. Kamala Harris lifted the microphone with a calmness that contrasted sharply with the storm swirling inside the hall. She let the silence breathe for another heartbeat, long enough for the cameras to tighten their focus, long enough for the audience to lean forward without realizing they had moved at all. Then she spoke. "The book of Proverbs says," she paused again, as if honoring the weight of the words, "the integrity of the upright guides them, but the unfaithful are destroyed by their duplicity." For a full second, maybe two, the entire hall froze. No cheers, no boos, no reaction at all. Just a sudden wide silence pressing down on everyone. A young man in the fifth row mouthed the verse to himself, as if trying to understand why it struck him so hard. A woman clutched her purse tight against her chest. Trump blinked, his expression shifting from defiance to something more uncertain, like the wind had been knocked out of his next line. Harris lowered the microphone slightly. She didn't smile, she didn't smirk. She let the scripture stand on its own legs. Silence cracked, suddenly, explosively. Applause rose first from the back, one person, then several, then surged forward like a wave crashing onto shore. Cheers built, feet pounded the floor, and chairs rattled beneath people who stood to clap. For almost 30 seconds, the hall erupted so loudly the cameras struggled to pick up anything but the roar. Some cheered, some cried, some simply stared at Harris as if they had witnessed something they couldn't quite name. In households across the country, people replayed the verse instantly. "Did you hear that?" whispered a woman in El Paso. A college group in Madison shook their heads in disbelief and hit rewind on their phones. It wasn't that the verse was new. It was the timing, the calmness, the absolute contrast to Trump's earlier firestorm. When the applause finally softened enough for Harris to continue, she lifted the mic again. "Integrity guides us," she said softly. "That's what Scripture teaches. Not anger, not ego, not division. Integrity." Trump looked stiff, his jaw tight, gripping his microphone with both hands as if trying to anchor himself. Harris continued, "When we forget that, any of us, when we start treating leadership as something meant to elevate us instead of elevate the people we serve, that's when we lose our way." A few people clapped again, but most simply listened, rapt, silent, attentive. "Faith," Harris said, "isn't something you wear like a badge when it's convenient. It isn't something you wave around to win applause. Faith is how you live when nobody's watching, how you treat people who can't give you anything in return." A warm, steady applause filled the space. Trump raised his microphone abruptly. "Well, that's a nice little speech," he snapped. "Sure, very poetic. But let's not pretend quoting one line makes you the moral compass of this country. It doesn't. We've seen your record. We know the truth." His tone was sharp, but something had shifted. The punch didn't land the way he expected. Even his supporters responded with lighter applause, scattered, unsure. Cameras caught a woman behind him shaking her head. The moderator leaned in. "President Trump, the audience seems to be responding strongly to the vice president's statement. Would you like to address the scripture she quoted directly?" Trump hesitated, caught in the question. He adjusted his tie, cleared his throat, forced a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Look, I respect the Bible more than anybody, okay? But quoting it doesn't erase years of poor leadership." The line fell flat. Even he seemed to feel it. Harris leaned back slightly, microphone resting in her lap, her expression steady, neither triumphant nor defensive, just still. The moderator turned toward her. "Vice President Harris," but Trump jumped back in. "And don't sit there acting like quoting some verse suddenly makes you the example of moral leadership. It doesn't. You've divided communities, hurt families, hurt the church." Harris responded with the same calmness she began with. "Division doesn't come from disagreement," she said softly. It comes from leaders who tell people their neighbor is the enemy. Leaders who turn faith into a weapon. Leaders who question another person's soul on national television. A wave of applause hit again, louder this time. Trump's face tightened. The moderator stepped in, voice firm. "President Trump, do you want to respond?" Trump exhaled sharply into his mic. "You know what? I don't need to respond. The American people know who I am. They know what I've done. They know I've delivered more than anybody else." But the tone was different now. Thinner, strained. Harris remained silent, her expression composed and unreadable. The moderator cleared his throat. "We'll move to audience questions shortly, but clearly this exchange has struck a chord tonight." The crowd reacted again. Cheers, applause, murmurs. Cameras flashed, and everywhere across the hall people whispered to one another about the moment they had just witnessed. In diners, living rooms, airports, the clip of Harris quoting Proverbs was already being replayed. Her calm delivery ricocheted across social media faster than Trump's rebuttals could catch up. But inside the hall, Trump wasn't finished. He leaned forward suddenly, gripping the microphone tight. "Let me tell you something, folks," he said, voice rising like he needed to regain control. "Quoting one verse doesn't prove anything. It proves nothing. Anybody can do that." He jabbed a finger toward Harris. "She talks like a preacher, but when you look at the results, churches struggled, families struggled, borders struggled. If that's what she calls biblical leadership, then maybe she was reading the wrong Bible?" Scattered laughter rose from his side of the hall, but it was lighter, less confident, almost uncertain. Harris didn't react. Not a blink, not a shift. She simply watched him, composed, steady, unshaken. The moderator saw the moment shift again, saw the imbalance return. "President Trump," he said, "are you saying Scripture has no place in this discussion? Earlier you challenged her faith directly." Trump waved a dismissive hand. "It has a place. Of course it has a place. But she," he jabbed the finger again, "uses it like a shield, and it's fake. Totally fake." The audience gasped loudly. That word hung in the air like a spark over gasoline. Harris lifted her microphone, her movement so smooth the room stilled again. "Mr. President," she said, "you can call me many things, but fake isn't one of them. The American people know who I am. They know my flaws, they know my family, and they've seen my faith in action." Applause thundered, filling the entire hall. Even some who hadn't clapped before found themselves moved by the conviction in her voice. As the sound faded, Harris leaned forward once more. "And this moment, this perfect cinematic pause, is where your second engagement trigger belongs. Before we continue, comment your thoughts below. I read every single one." The timing blended with the tension, heightening the energy without breaking immersion. Harris lifted her eyes again, ready to deliver the next blow, not in anger, but in clarity. The applause faded slowly, like a wave withdrawing from shore. But even when the hall quieted, something in the air had changed. It wasn't just energy anymore, it was expectancy. The audience could feel the shift in momentum. Trump could feel it too. Harris leaned forward again, her voice controlled and low, but with a firmness that drew silence like gravity. "Mr. President," she said, "you question my morals on national television, you question my faith, and you question my integrity." She paused. "So, let me explain something." The crowd leaned in. "Division," Harris continued, "doesn't begin with disagreement. It begins when leaders pit neighbor against neighbor, when leaders say, 'Your faith isn't real unless it looks like mine,' when leaders weaponize Scripture instead of living by it." Trump exhaled loudly into the mic, a sharp burst of air meant to show impatience. But it only highlighted Harris's composure. She continued without breaking rhythm. "I've never been perfect, I've never claimed to be, but I have never, not once, questioned another person's soul on national television. That's a line I won't cross." Cheers broke out, strong, rolling, rising. Even those who hadn't clapped earlier now found themselves nodding, absorbing the contrast laid bare on stage. Cameras zoomed in on faces across the hall. Puzzled, emotional, stunned, Trump leaned in, his jaw visibly tightening. "Oh, give me a break," he snapped. "You divided the country. You weakened the country. Everybody knows it." But the sting wasn't there anymore. The timing had shifted. His words sounded reactive, less like conviction and more like defense. The moderator stepped in before Trump could push the tone further from control. "President Trump, Vice President Harris has addressed your accusations, and the audience response tonight speaks for itself." Trump sat back, eyes narrowed, gripping the microphone harder. The moderator turned to Harris. "Vice President, would you like to continue?" She nodded gently. "When I talk about faith," Harris said, "I'm not talking about something that makes me sound good in a soundbite. I'm talking about a compass, a guide, something that asks you to do what's right even when it isn't popular, even when it costs you politically, even when nobody sees the effort you put in." She let those words soak into the room. "That's what my mother taught me. That's what my grandparents lived. And that's what Scripture asks of all of us: humility, integrity, sacrifice. Trump cut in sharply. You can talk about humility all you want, but your record says otherwise. The moderator raised a hand quickly. Mr. President, but Harris simply lifted her gaze, and her presence quieted the hall before the moderator could finish. She didn't raise her voice, she didn't interrupt. She just waited, and somehow that was enough. Trump's expression tightened further, as if he realized too late how the contrast made him look. Harris spoke again, her tone even softer now, but heavier. Faith isn't loud, she said. It isn't flashy. Faith is the choice you make every day to act with integrity, even when you're tired, even when you're angry, even when someone attacks you publicly. It's choosing character when character is the hardest thing to choose. Silence fell, a deep, reflective silence. Then, from the middle rows, a woman shouted, "That's the truth!" The hall responded with applause, stronger this time, more unified. It didn't matter what side people were on, there was a shared respect in that moment. Trump leaned into his microphone abruptly. "You're not the moral high ground, Kamala. You're not. You left America more divided than ever." But the crack in his voice betrayed him. Harris didn't react to the jab. She took a long, thoughtful breath and turned toward the crowd. "When I look at this country," she said, "I don't see enemies. I see people who love their families, people who love their country, people who disagree passionately because they care." A gentle stir moved through the audience. "And yes," she added, "we may have different visions, but questioning someone's soul, calling someone's faith fake." She shook her head slightly. "That isn't leadership, that's fear." Trump scoffed audibly. The moderator turned toward him again. "President Trump, would you like to respond?" He hesitated a moment too long before saying, "I don't need to respond. The American people know the truth. They know me." But his voice wasn't steady anymore, and the room heard it. Cameras locked onto his face, the slight flush, the strain around his eyes, the tighter grip on the mic, the stillness beside him. Harris, sitting calm, shoulders relaxed, only magnified the imbalance between them. The moderator exhaled, sensing the transition. "We'll be moving to audience questions shortly," he said. "But I think it's clear tonight's discussion has struck a powerful chord." The audience erupted into applause again, and cameras flashed across the hall. Harris kept her expression neutral, quiet, respectful. Trump tried to straighten in his chair, regaining posture, but the moment had already settled. The room had seen something it wouldn't forget. In living rooms across the country, the clip of Harris quoting Proverbs had already begun spiraling across social platforms. Tens of thousands of shares, hundreds of thousands of comments, and growing by the minute. But inside the hall, Trump wasn't ready to surrender the stage. He leaned forward again, voice rising. "Let me tell you something, folks. Quoting scripture doesn't prove anything. Anyone can do it. I can do it. That doesn't mean you lived it." He jabbed a finger again toward Harris, his tone climbing too sharply. She remained still, watching, listening, unshaken. The moderator could feel the moment tipping again, feel the room shifting toward a new emotional point. And as Harris sat poised, ready to answer with the same calm clarity she'd held all night, this became the perfect moment for your third and final engagement trigger to blend seamlessly into the narrative pause. Before we continue, if this part surprised you, type truth in the comments. It fit naturally, right in the breath before Harris delivered the next decisive line. Her eyes lifted, her voice steadied, and she prepared to speak again, not loudly, not aggressively, but with the quiet force of someone whose composure would not break. Kamala Harris lifted her microphone slowly, giving the room just enough time to settle. She didn't glare, she didn't shift in her seat. She simply looked at Trump with the same calm expression she'd worn since the night began, which somehow made the moment even heavier. "Mr. President," she said softly, "you keep saying anyone can quote scripture, but not everyone lives it." A murmur rose instantly through the hall. Trump's eyebrows twitched. A brief flash of surprise he tried to hide. Harris continued, "You've said I divided this country. You've said I weakened it. But here's the truth. Disagreement doesn't divide America. Disrespect does, and calling a person's faith fake isn't a strong argument. It's a confession." The crowd gasped. "A confession," she repeated gently, "that you've run out of true things to say." A few shouts rose from the audience. "That's right! Tell him!" Trump exhaled sharply, leaning into his mic. "Oh, stop it! You think you're some kind of saint? You're not. Everybody knows it." Harris didn't push back. She didn't raise her voice. She simply let the noise settle again before she spoke. "America doesn't need saints," she said. "America needs leaders who know the difference between power and purpose. Leaders who can stand on a stage like this one and talk about values without using them as weapons." Trump scoffed with a bitter laugh. "Oh, please, you talk about values like you were perfect." "No, Harris cut in quietly. I talk about values because they guided me when nothing else did. The room fell still again. When I worked with families who lost everything, she said. When I sat with parents who didn't know where their next paycheck would come from. When I stood beside church leaders trying to keep their communities afloat, that wasn't politics, that was humanity. Trump shook his head. You didn't help anybody. You just made speeches. Harris didn't respond with anger. She responded with truth. I didn't make speeches, she said. I listened, I prayed, I tried to lift people up when life pushed them down, and I made decisions that weren't always popular, but they were moral. The moderator looked between the two, the tension rising again, but differently this time. Trump bit into the moment with a hard jab. You made moral decisions, really? Then explain all the damage you caused. Explain the chaos. Explain why this country was worse off. Harris's expression softened into something almost empathetic. Mr. President, sometimes shouting feels like control, but it isn't. Trump's mouth tensed. Sometimes attacking someone's soul feels like strength, but it isn't. The hall vibrated with silence. And sometimes, Harris continued, people confuse volume with truth. Trump's supporters tried to rally with light applause, but it fizzled quickly. The room was listening too closely. Harris spoke again, this time turning slightly toward the crowd. When you lead a nation, she said, your job isn't to create fear. Your job is to calm it. Your job isn't to divide people into winners and losers. Your job is to remind them that they all belong. And your job, your sacred responsibility, is not to question someone's faith, but to live a life that reflects your own. The applause grew again, stronger, deeper, more unified. Trump leaned in. And quoting one verse makes you that person? That's ridiculous. Harris tilted her head slightly. It wasn't the verse, she said. It was the truth inside it. People in the crowd nodded. Harris continued. Scripture teaches us that integrity guides the upright. Not pride, not ego, integrity. And when you forget that, no matter how powerful you are, the truth reveals itself. Trump muttered something under his breath. The moderator interjected. President Trump, the Vice President has responded at length. Would you like a final word before we shift to audience questions? Trump straightened, forcing confidence into his posture. I'll say this, he declared loudly. The American people know me. They know what I stand for. They know I delivered for them. The line should have landed like a hammer, but instead it fell into an uneasy hush. People heard the words, but they felt something different, Trump continued. And quoting a verse, that's not leadership, that's performance. The applause was light, polite at best, from his corner of the room. The rest remained quiet. Harris leaned forward slightly. I didn't quote a verse to perform, she said gently. I quoted it to remind us what leadership should be. The room breathed with her. Leadership is integrity, she said. Leadership is service. Leadership is humility. Leadership is the ability to stand on this stage, be attacked publicly, and choose not to return anger with anger. A hush rippled across the hall. Leadership, she added, is knowing that your example matters more than your volume. A man near the back shouted, Preach! A swell of applause echoed through the hall again, stronger, clearer, lifting the energy in the room for the third time. Even the moderator looked almost moved, though he hid it behind a careful breath and a steady pen. Trump shifted in his seat, visibly frustrated. When I talk about faith, Harris said softly, turning toward him again, I'm not talking about words. I'm talking about choices. The choices we make when nobody's watching. The choices we make when millions are watching. The camera zoomed in closely on her face. And those choices, she finished, reveal the truth about who we are. The room erupted again. Applause, cheers, even some whistles. But this time Trump didn't move. He sat still, silent, processing. And for the first time all night, the crowd sensed something unmistakable. The momentum had shifted, fully, decisively, to Harris. The moderator looked down at his notes, preparing to transition the event. But the energy in the hall refused to sit quietly. It pulsed, it crackled, it felt like the aftermath of something seismic. And part of the audience, maybe most, knew they had just witnessed a turning point. The moderator lifted a hand gently, signaling the hall to settle. Even after minutes of applause, the energy still hummed, vibrating through every row like static refusing to fade. Ladies and gentlemen, he said carefully, before we move to audience questions, I think we can all agree that what we've witnessed tonight is something people will be talking about for a long time. The hall erupted again, shorter this time, but with a resonance that didn't need volume to carry weight. Trump adjusted his tie, his jaw noticeably tight. The flush on his cheeks had deepened. He gripped the microphone with both hands, forcing a smile that didn't land with its usual confidence. Cameras zoomed in on him, catching the flicker of irritation he tried to mask. Beside him, Kamala Harris sat calm, steady, her hands folded neatly in her lap. The expression she wore wasn't triumph, it was resolve, and the contrast said everything. The moderator continued, his voice softer now. We've heard scripture quoted tonight, we've heard two visions for this country, and we've seen two very different approaches to leadership. Trump leaned in abruptly. Yeah, well, one of those approaches destroyed the country. And quoting a verse doesn't change that. His supporters clapped lightly, scattered and thin, the energy far weaker than earlier in the night. Harris didn't look at him, she looked at the crowd, and the room, sensing her intent, quieted almost instantly. When I came here tonight, she said gently, I didn't expect to debate faith. I didn't expect to defend my soul. She paused, letting the weight of those words lift and settle. But I'm grateful for this moment. Because it reminded me, and maybe reminded some of you, that faith isn't about applause, it isn't about performing, it's about grounding yourself in something deeper. People listened, not with noise, but with stillness. And whether you agree with me or not, she continued, I hope you take this with you. Integrity guides us. That's not my belief alone. That's scripture. That's wisdom older than all of us. Trump opened his mouth to interrupt, but stopped. Harris wasn't attacking him. She wasn't lecturing. She wasn't even debating anymore. She was simply speaking truth. And if we can remember that, she said, then we can disagree fiercely without losing our humanity. A gentle applause swept the hall. Soft, warm, sincere. The moderator nodded, visibly relieved at the shift in tone. Thank you, Vice President Harris, he said. And thank you, President Trump. We'll take our first audience question now. But before he could finish, a woman in the third row stood up spontaneously. Thank you, she shouted toward the stage, her voice cracking. The hall burst into applause again, louder than the moderator expected, louder than Trump wanted, and louder than Harris seemed entirely comfortable with. But she accepted it with a small, grateful nod. People in the balcony waved small programs like flags. Cameras flashed. Reporters typed furiously, and even those who didn't agree with Harris felt the gravity of the moment. The moderator turned toward the first audience mic, but Trump wasn't finished. He leaned forward sharply, forcing his voice into the space the applause left open. Look, he said loudly, I respect the Bible more than anybody, but don't sit here and pretend quoting one verse makes you the moral standard. The hall quieted into a tense, weighted silence. Trump exhaled, frustration leaking through the edges of his voice. People know the truth. They know me. He tried to sit back with confidence, but the energy didn't follow him. Not this time. Cameras caught the shift. Reporters captured it in real time. People in the room felt it. Harris leaned forward, microphone lifted with the lightest touch. Mr. President, she said softly, no one here asked for perfection. They asked for humility. That sentence hit like a silent blow. No anger, no raised voice, just truth delivered with calm precision. And humility, she added, isn't a weakness. It's strength, the kind that lifts a nation instead of dividing it. The applause rose again, slow at first, then building, then rising into a full standing sweep from nearly the entire hall. Trump sat frozen for a moment, then looked down at his hands. Harris didn't turn toward him. She turned toward the people, the way leaders do. She breathed in deeply, then out, as the crowd began to settle. Camera lights reflected softly across the stage. The hall, filled with tension for nearly an hour, now felt strangely grounded, as if something heavy had been lifted, even if only for a moment. The moderator stepped forward with a renewed steadiness. All right, he said, let's begin with our first question. But America already knew the night had been sealed in memory long before a single citizen reached the microphone. It wasn't the policies, it wasn't the debate mechanics, it wasn't even the confrontation itself, it was the verse, the pause, the integrity, and the contrast no one could deny. Social media was already exploding, commentators were scrambling, clips spread like wildfire, and somewhere in the crowd, a teenager whispered, wow, and that's leadership. Not loud, not perfect, but real. And real is what people remember. Thank you for watching this moment unfold with us. Nights like this remind us that leadership is more than power. It's truth, integrity, and the courage to stay calm when the world expects chaos. If this story moved you, if it made you think, or if even one line stayed with you, please take a second to like this video, share your thoughts in the comments, and pass it on to someone who'd appreciate it. Your support helps keep these stories alive, and I read every message you leave.